So kia ora koutou katoa, ko Vicky Watson toko ingoa, ko takumahi ki Aotearoa Circle, ko te Chief Executive. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on biotechnology. Thank you for joining us. As I've said, there are a few hundred of you who are registered, so I realise others will be still coming into the webinar. If I could have the first slide, thank you. And onto the biotech cover. Thanks, Han. Next slide, thank you. So today we are launching another new report, Modern Genetic Technology Applications in Aotearoa Food and Fibre Production. It's a significant beast at over 140 pages. So what we're looking to do here is highlight key areas. Essentially, we want to explain what we've done, why we've done it, and those next steps. And so we hope this will be the start of a number of informed conversations. Thank you. Next slide. I want to welcome, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers today. Nick Pike, Chair of AgMart, who will speak to why AgMart has helped fund this workstream. Hopefully we'll have Ben Wakely, and we also have Sophie McGaskill, who from the PwC team as the authors of the report. We will then be joined on the panel by Gareth Edgecombe, CEO of TNG Global, Dr. Emily Parker, Departmental Science Advisor from MB, and Dr. Peter Longdill, General Manager of Sustainability for Sanford. Please also add questions in the Q&A. We will have time for that at the end of the session. And we will also be putting a poll in the chat at the end of the webinar, which is key to phase 2, but more on that later. And the report will go live on our website following the end of this webinar, and that's the aotearoacircle.nz. Thank you. So just before we start, why biotechnology? Why is the circle in this space? It's a sensitive area, so why are we in it? And I just wanted to highlight that we had 2 significant reports, Manakai Initiative and the Agri-Sector Adaptation Roadmap, that came out early 2023. And recommendations in both of those reports came through as that we needed to revisit biotechnology. We were also guided by our rangatahi, which is a shadow board of young people under 30 who hold the circle accountable. And they asked, if there is biotechnology that can help New Zealand adapt to climate change and to protect our biodiversity, how can we learn more? Next slide, thank you. So just some further context. We are an apolitical organisation. Our partners are both public sector and private sector. And so to be clear, our objective with this report right from the beginning and through the process has been what could modern genetic technology look like for New Zealand versus we're not dictating what should be done. And as stated, this sort of started early last year, and it was great. Thank you, AgMart, for those early conversations and leading into that work stream being launched. And just again, to remind those new to the circle in the webinar, the circle vision is sustainable prosperity. It is about an economic view, but being able to achieve that for future generations. And so our purpose is then very much around restoring natural capital. So that's some context around why the circle is in this space, how we came to do this work stream. Next slide, please. So if the biotechnology conversation was a jigsaw puzzle, our work is really just one piece. Other pieces, such as those illustrated here, sit outside the scope to a certain extent and in great detail, but they will crop up at a high level in phase 2, which again, we will talk to a little bit later. So it's my pleasure to now hand over to Nick Pike, Chair of AgMart. His organisation, as I mentioned, helped fund this work, and he'll talk about why they did that. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Vicky, and kia ora all. Hopefully you'll get a lot out of this session. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And AgMart have been thinking about what's happening with genetic technologies over a number of years, but felt that it was very important that the information was readily available to stimulate a mature conversation about genetic technologies in New Zealand, particularly if the government is planning to review regulations and changes over the next year or so. We've had a number of reports and scientific papers related to the science of the genetic technologies and how they could be used in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But AgMart felt it was important to ensure that there was readily available information on other aspects, such as the socio-economic implications, the environmental impacts, and some work around the potential regulatory frameworks, and that this work was undertaken so that it was independently available to those people that wanted to use it, such as the decision makers that are navigating their way through the innovation and looking at how they can ensure we have responsible practices in place for the long-term well-being of New Zealand's environmental and society. So as Vicky said, this report aims to help guide what could happen rather than what should happen. It's a conversation starter for this really important topic, and it aims to help ensure that we have the right tools in our toolbox as we move forward to confronting, managing, and mitigating the impacts of climate change and biodiversity crises, etc. So the report uses a number of case studies to step us through the various applications and the considerations. It does not delve into the market implications of genetic technology, sorry. They need to be assessed separately and considered separately as they impact New Zealand. So finally, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of AgMart the excellent leadership that Aotearoa Circle have done in getting this work underway and championing the work stream, and also the work undertaken by PwC and a number of other people who've been interviewed, discussed, been involved in working groups, and are part of the panelists today. So I hope you enjoy the session and you find it rewarding, and hopefully it helps drive some good conversations going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. So that's a beautiful segue into introducing Sophie McGaskill from PwC. Again, a huge amount of work from the team, hours and hours to produce the report. And so Sophie's going to just give us a high-level understanding, really to sort of encourage you to go straight to the report and read it afterwards. So over to you, Soph.
Thanks for the introduction, Vicky. Hi, everyone. Just like to start by saying that PwC feels so privileged to have worked on such an important topic for the sector at such a pivotal time. And as Vicky and Nick mentioned, this work is sort of building on previous work by the Aotearoa Circle. And it looked to address the questions, can certain types of modern genetic technology be a tool in the toolbox to protect nature and fight climate change? And what are the environmental and socio-economic implications of adopting these technologies? This report aims to address these questions and enhance decision makers' understanding of the choices around regulating genetic technology and how those choices might impact the environment, our society, and the economy for current and future generations. So today, next slide please, Han, I want to give you a very brief overview of the report, noting that this report is detailed, over 140 pages, and the topic of biotechnology is complex and nuanced. So this overview is really just going to be a teaser. There's a huge amount of value and information within the report, but you're going to have to give it to a read to find that out. So over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of our approach and the role of stakeholders in the report's development. a brief introduction to the regulatory and socioeconomic frameworks that underpin this analysis, and an introduction to the plant and animal case studies, and sort of exploring some of the key insights that emerged there. So, the approach. We really wanted to make sure that we took a credible approach to developing this report. As we've said, it's a really complicated topic, so we wanted to work with the experts to build strong and accurate analysis. The analysis centered around three key components: our regulatory scenarios, our socioeconomic framework, and the animal and plant case studies. These three components build together to deliver on the overall purpose of the report, to explore those possible environmental and socioeconomic impacts of different case studies through the different regulatory scenarios. So firstly, we selected those regulatory scenarios. We selected them to cover the global spectrum of regulatory approaches to capturing the risk of using genetic technology. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into great detail on these scenarios today, but the report has some really clear explanations to support further understanding here. The next part of the approach, we built a framework of socioeconomic impacts that was based on stakeholder interviews and research. And then finally, we developed the case studies. These case studies are looking at different applications of genetic technology in different production systems. Now, with these case studies, we took a slightly different approach for animals and plants. For plants, we selected 3 specific applications for in-depth analysis. For the animal case studies, we took a higher level approach, giving an overview of international research in the space and some of the possible socioeconomic implications. We took this difference in approach because there haven't been as many advancements in animal modifications, and we just couldn't create animal case studies with the same level of detail and certainty as we did for plants. We know that in conversations around genetic modification, it's so critical to stick to the evidence, and that's really what we've tried to do in this report. Now, we could not have achieved this approach alone. We are so very grateful for the input and support from 38 different organisations that we engaged with throughout this process. We worked with a core advisory group and food and fibre sector group closely throughout each stage of the report's development. And we engaged subject matter experts where their expertise was needed, including Māori researchers, research institutes, commercial genetics entities, government representatives, industry good organisations, thought leaders, and rangatahi. This is a complex and nuanced conversation, and the expertise, diverse views, and knowledge of these stakeholders contributed greatly to this analysis. Now, the primary focus of this report is looking at the possible environmental impacts, but we can't look at this alone. The use of genetic technology in New Zealand is intrinsically linked to our society and our economy. So we developed this socioeconomic framework to highlight possible implications as we work through those case studies. Throughout the report, we look at potential impacts domestically. So what factors like community, cultural values, social license, maintaining equity, innovation, IP protection. We also looked further abroad. How might this impact our relationship with the world? How might this impact our competitive advantage? How will consumers respond? What are the implications for our market access and our consumers? This report is by no means a thorough deep dive into these factors. Each of them could be a report in and of itself. So the Aotearoa Circle will be looking deeper into these factors as the next phase of its work. Mark from the Circle will be talking to you shortly about this. We want to hear what you think about these factors. What do you think will be important for New Zealand to consider over the coming months and years as we move through this regulatory change program? All right, so now we get to the juicy parts of the report, the case studies. When selecting these case studies, we did not select them as we thought that they would be the front runners. we selected these case studies to showcase the range of risk profiles, environmental implications, and benefits that would allow us to draw out the key differences in global regulatory approaches. As Vicky said in her introduction, this report is about understanding what we could do, not what we should do. The report aims to frame a conversation around questions such as, how would New Zealand's current regulatory system address this case study? How might this differ if this case study were used in a regulatory system similar to what you have in the UK or Europe or Canada? What might these regulatory differences mean for environmental and socioeconomic impacts? So our first case study, we looked at rapid flowering apple trees. This is a genetically modified apple tree with a significantly reduced breeding cycle that can be used to achieve high-value traits on accelerated timeframes. Our next case study was high condensed tannin white clover. This, a genetically modified white clover species, produces high condensed tannins in its leaf tissue and may have positive impacts such as increased productivity, lower emissions, and increased animal welfare. And finally, for the plant case studies, we looked at sterile Douglas fir. This is a genetically modified sterile Douglas fir tree, which can support efforts to managing our wilding problems. So as I mentioned before, because of the differences in evidence, when it comes to the animal case studies, we only talk about international research that could be applied in New Zealand at a high level. We look at applications and implications of genetic technology in food and fibre production in the marine environment and the terrestrial environment. We also look across systems at the potential applications in pest and predator control. Now, before I get into the detail of these case studies, I just want to say that all the technologies discussed today and in the report do have an obvious benefit. Scientists and industry only invest in these technologies if they believe they will have a meaningful, positive impact. So, as I talk you through the case studies, I'm going to lead off with some pretty impressive possible benefits, but I will follow through with some of the other important environmental and socioeconomic considerations which present different possible risks or trade-offs with the use of genetic technology. Again, it's the aim of this report to surface the evidence so we can have an informed conversation around the trade-offs we are willing to make and what regulatory scenarios best align with that value judgment. So, our first case study, this has applications in horticulture. The hort industry is expected to face challenges as climate change continues to make weather more extreme and unpredictable. Orchardists will face the challenge of altered growing conditions, severe weather events, and increased pest and disease pressure. It becomes increasingly important to be able to adapt to these challenges and adapt quickly. This is where this application of genetic technology comes in. This case study involves the use of genetically modified apple trees, which have a shortened breeding cycle from about 6 years down to 1 year, enabling the rapid development of high-value traits. In the report, we modeled the use of rapid flowering to attain black spot resistance. This modeled application resulted in the sector attaining the trait 20 years faster than if only conventional breeding techniques had been used. This, translated, means potentially 30,000 fewer fungicide sprays nationally, which could have huge benefits for biodiversity and the environment. But now some of the other considerations. There's a degree of uncertainty around how a rapid flowering tree may interact with its environment. We haven't been able to do field trials in New Zealand, and we have some outstanding questions around how altered flowering patterns might impact our pollinators. There are also some specific socioeconomic considerations for this application. We need to understand how consumers may respond if these apples are labelled genetically modified. Would their willingness to pay be lower? We also need to consider any impacts to social license. Producers may benefit or face opposition, depending on public sentiment and perception of the benefits versus risks. And finally, New Zealand is currently a market leader in the apple industry. This technology may allow New Zealand to maintain or even extend its competitive advantage by enabling that agile production of high-value varieties. So our next case study looks at genetically modified clover in dairy production systems. Dairy farming is one of New Zealand's largest exports and a significant contributor to the economy. However, it's also one of New Zealand's leading contributors to climate change through enteric methane and nitrous oxide emissions. This modified clover may support the sector in reducing its environmental impact. Possible benefits include increasing production, reducing methane and nitrous oxide emissions, reducing nitrogen leaching, and reducing the incidence of bloat in cows. In the report, we model the adoption of high CT white clover in dairy production systems. And the results show us that by reducing nitrous oxide and methane emissions, there is the potential to contribute 4 to 10% of the 2050 Zero Carbon Act target. Now, this is a non-trivial contribution to a really important target, but there are some trade-offs to consider. As with the rapid flowering apples, we have been unable to trial this outside of containment in New Zealand. Trials have been completed overseas, but without New Zealand-specific field trials, we cannot be certain of the impact this may have on the environment. Further, wild-type white clovers can disperse over large distances. So if high CT white clover was released outside of containment, it would be expected to spread. So if there were negative impacts from this organism, the significance of them could be high. If we look at our socioeconomic considerations for this case study, they're largely linked to that low containability factor. The release of this forage may limit producer responsiveness. So the ability for white clover to disperse means that once it's adopted by some farmers, it may be detected in surrounding farms, even if those respective farmers want their pasture to remain free of genetically modified forage. The lower containability may also have implications for accreditations. It may increase compliance for individual producers achieving non-GMO accreditation standards. This case study is especially interesting when it comes to the different regulatory frameworks. In our hypothetical scenarios, this case study would be treated completely differently in the UK, Europe, and US than it would in Canada. Now, unfortunately, as I said, don't have time to get into the detail there, but please have a closer look at the report if you want to see how that plays out. Now, final plant case study, sterile Douglas fir. This case study looks at how sterile conifers could address some of the forestry sector's challenges with wilding exotic populations. Sterility may enable existing plantations to stop their contribution and also enable new plantations to be established that would have otherwise been prohibited under national standards. We modelled the benefit from transitioning existing plantations to sterile Douglas fir and showed that without further intervention, it may result in a 200,000 hectare difference in total area impacted by wildings after 50 years. This modelling really highlighted that we need comprehensive wilding control programs in tandem with sterility. The model indicated that the more effective the control programs are, the more important sterile conifers become. We'll never be able to get to zero wildings without sterility. The case study also looked at the impact from newly established Douglas fir plantation forests. As the Douglas fir are sterile, there's very low risk of the modified tree negatively impacting the receiving environment. It's also likely that new plantations could have good outcomes for the sector, environment, and communities if it is used carefully alongside other policy instruments to ensure that the right tree goes in the right place. There are also some key socioeconomic factors to consider in this case study. This application, as we said, may enable the establishment of new plantations, so that may increase New Zealand's competitive advantage. However, in terms of accreditations, the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, has currently banned genetically modified trees. Currently, over 1 million of the 1.8 million hectares of plantation forest in New Zealand is FSC certified. And lastly, we could think about how this might affect social license. Introducing sterile Douglas fir trees might help regain some of that trust and acceptance that was lost due to the environmental effects of wildings. All right, now we move on to our animal case studies. As I mentioned earlier, these case studies are non-specific and explore general impacts. The report does feature conceptual analysis of potential environmental risks, benefits, and impacts associated with genetically modified animals. But today, we're not going to go into that detail. Instead, I'm going to draw your attention to some of the animal socioeconomic considerations. These have some really interesting points of difference from the plant socioeconomic considerations. If we start looking close to home, decision makers could consider impacts to innovation. Presently, research into genetically modified plants surpasses that of animals. That's primarily due to stricter regulatory processes, ethical concerns, and the complexities of animal biology. This difference in research attention leads to limited funding and expertise in genetically modified animals, which slows down progress in this field. If we look specific to the terrestrial environment, the only MPI-approved containment facility for genetically modified livestock is set to close June 2025. This may limit the ability for New Zealand to conduct further research in this area. New Zealand researchers are currently seeking partnerships with other countries to try and meet those research needs. Decision makers could also consider cultural values. Although the majority of New Zealand's farm species are not considered taonga, current farming practices can still significantly impact taonga species. Cultural considerations came up quite a bit when we were talking about the marine environment, as the taonga species we do farm, green-lipped mussels and freshwater crayfish, are farmed in the marine environment. We also saw cultural and community values arise when we discussed the use of genetic technology for pest and predator control. Pests and predators are a commonly known and publicly understood problem, but there needs to be some social comfort and serious consideration of how this use of technology may align with community and Māori values. Finally, we can look outward. How might this impact our relationships with the world? Compared to plants, genetically modified animal products face far greater scrutiny from consumers and regulators. Regulation around genetically modified animals can differ from the regulation of plants, and so we may want to consider this when looking at our alignment with foreign trade partners. So, I'm aware that I have covered a lot of information over a lot of topics. We've looked at production level environmental risk all the way up to macro trade implications. The aim of this report is to surface all of that information and to contextualize it within our regulatory scenarios, to allow the reader to ask, which of these regulatory scenarios will lead to environmental and socioeconomic outcomes that align best with my risk and value judgments? Now, it is a shame that we didn't have time to get into the regulatory scenarios today, but I really do encourage you to read the report and explore this a bit more. We hope that the report and today's discussion will help you develop an informed view on what New Zealand's risk and regulatory settings could look like to ensure best outcomes for current and future generations. This report does not pretend to try to give you all the answers, but it does try to give you the tools and the context to ask the right questions. We hope that this can be a meaningful contribution and help further the conversation on the use of genetic technology in New Zealand food and fibre production. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. A great presentation on a very complex report. So great that you've started us and taking us through how we could approach it and enable us to read it more fully afterwards. So we are now going to start our panel. Can I just invite Ben from PwC, Gareth, TNG Global, Dr. Emily Parker, Science Advisor for MB, and Dr. Peter Longdill, GM Sustainability for Sanford, to join us, please. Welcome. So, Ben, I might just start with you. Great work from the PwC team. I guess just coming back to the fact that we have been working on this for 8-9+ months, what were some of the big challenges putting this report together?
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for the question. Challenges in putting this together. Where do we start? Look, I think getting involved, we expected this topic to be a challenge. It's no secret there's controversy, a range of different views. There's quite a history here. So, I mean, in many ways, that's why we wanted to be involved. Right now, it's a really, really important topic. As Nick mentioned earlier, it's very timely. Probably if I was to, at a high level, go through some of the main challenges we found, there is a diversity of opinion and views here. So, and also, I guess, as well, sometimes the fears that this topic can invoke. So there's a lot of stakeholders across the sector who wanted to share their views. And I think that's a good thing, right? You want to hear from as many people as possible. But incorporating all of those views was quite a challenge. And I think the other thing I'd say is that the topic is deeply technical, and that can't be underestimated. So doing that justice, and you say kind of 9-ish months in a relatively short period of time, that's a challenge in and of itself. So for us, making something accurate, readable, informative, whilst balancing the different views required quite a bit of effort.
Thanks, Ben. Emily, I'll come to you just in terms of the science on the panel, the scientists on the panel. How have gene technologies changed, and how does this help us in managing the risks and opportunities of this technology more readily, I guess?
Kia ora koutou, and thanks, Vicky. And first of all, really want to congratulate the Aotearoa Circle on the production of this report. It's really timely and really useful to see the information that's been assembled together here. There's been a massive change in technologies over the last couple of decades, and we've seen regulations and the regulatory frameworks in other countries move and change in relationship to this. But what we have now is really, I guess I'm a chemist by training, so I guess we really have the opportunity to get to the precise molecular details of what's happening at the genetic level. And that ability to look into the genome, to look at the precise nature and sequence of bases, that ability to precisely define the changes that we are making when we undertake genetic technologies does give us some opportunities, both in terms of the benefits we might get from this technology and in how we might manage the risks associated with this technology as well. It gives us options that we can consider and incorporate in a regulatory framework.
Gareth and Peter, I'm going to come to you. Gareth, I'll start with you in terms of what are your customers telling you about the use of these technologies?
Kia ora, and thanks for the opportunity to be engaged on this really important topic. The specific answer from customers in this area is we haven't actually asked them specifically on this question, but what we do get feedback from customers across the world, the desire for attributes of our apples and other produce to have improved consumer characteristics, as well as through supply chain improved storageability and pest resistance. And in particular, we're seeing a lot of focus on environmental standards and decarbonisation. And that is right in front of us. For New Zealand exporting to the world, the decarbonisation story and the ability to demonstrate amazing quality produce that goes out to the world that has got that story behind it is going to be critical. And obviously, they're also looking for reliability of supply chains, and increasing volatility of growing conditions means that whatever we are able to produce here in New Zealand needs to be able to deal with that changing environment that we've got in front of us.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Gareth. How about you, Peter, from a Sanford point of view and fishery?
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks for having me here. Look, as a customer and consumer discussion topic in the seafood sector, it's really quite immature in terms of that sort of discussion. And I think that is not to say that there's no interest or concern, but rather we sort of interpret that to be there's really an implied expectation and understanding that our products are free from these type of technologies at present. We are typically targeting our products at the top end of global markets, where provenance and location are really key factors in achieving that. And that comes with a really acute awareness about how our markets understand and how receptive they are to these type of technologies. So that's, I guess, the view from our side.
Yeah, no, a lot. So it sounds like sort of a lot more conversations to happen. Ben, I'll ask, and probably a tough question in terms of trying to keep it to one or maybe two. What was the most surprising thing that you learned as you sort of worked on this with Sophie and the PwC team?
Thanks, Vicky. Keeping it to one or two. Well, I think we expected it to be a challenge, as I said earlier, and I guess we also expected a degree of reticence going into this in terms of speaking openly about the topic. The surprising thing for me was how ready stakeholders were to have the discussion, how willing everyone was to get involved and have a view, and generally people were supportive of doing the work. And I say that in general, and that was kind of regardless of the position. I mean, I think people just wanted to see the conversation starting. So to me, that was probably surprising, and I didn't necessarily get a sense before writing the report of just how strong some of that groundswell for the conversation was. I also feel like I've had a huge crash course in comms, balancing that technical, the emotive, getting the terminology right at the right level. I think consistency of terminology, communications is a massive part of all of that, and that can't be underestimated.
Thanks, Ben. Emily, as you sort of mentioned, biotechnology has moved a lot in the last couple of decades, but tell us about the biotechnology we already have in New Zealand.
Well, there's lots of examples, and I'm not sure I'll do credit to the science that is going out there in the community, but I mean the report did a wonderful job of producing some case studies. But the things that I'm aware of is there is huge ambition in the biomanufacturing space, and this is largely around microorganism genetic technologies. For instance, there was a recent EPA decision for producing for fermentation of milk proteins, and so those technologies are coming through, and there's a big clamour for New Zealand to be able to take the opportunities those technologies offer. We're seeing work being done on altering grasses and forages, obviously, for greater production, as we've heard about in Sophie's introduction to the report too, and those technologies to reduce methane as well. So there's a whole range of scales of opportunities. I agree with the report that the animal work is further behind. The other, partly it's life expectancy of those organisms and other things that dictate that, but there is a lot of work and a lot of ambition, and when we look globally, there's some real opportunities for New Zealand to consider how it might take advantage of some of the gene technology changes.
Thanks, Emily. Gareth, one of the case studies was rapid flowering apple trees. How do you see the potential of something like that in terms of both benefits and risks?
Yeah, that's a big question. So, and just I guess picking up on a couple of points from the panelists, I think the theme that Peter talked about, where New Zealand's product out to the world is for the future going to have to rely on being high trust, high value, very, very credible product for the future. And I think that's a given. And the New Zealand's always been in that situation. If you take the Apple industry, it's been at the forefront of driving new innovation for the last 100 years, and that's helped create a really vibrant export industry. And picking up on Emily's point, the movement, the changes to the quality of precise opportunities in modern genetics and the safety that goes with it is starting to open up real new pathways. And so that example of accelerating beneficial traits, but doing that in a safe way, is trying to thread the needle between using new technology and new opportunities to really keep New Zealand at that forefront. And I think that's such an important topic for us as a country to consider if we're thinking about the challenges of productivity and where we're going to get our future economic engine growth from. But at the same time, how do we make sure that we're doing it very, very carefully to protect that image that we need to protect? And I think that idea that this is going to take a few years to come through, and with that, if we can make sure the education and the science keeps up with the new opportunities, and we actually reframe the opportunity for the global consumer base, I think there's an opportunity to thread that needle. So coming back to your question, there are a whole lot of traits that we could look at that would increase pest resistance, storage ability, consumer traits, ability to deal with environmental challenges that we've got, that we think could be applicable, but we'd have to do that really, really safely. And just finally on that, it's not just growing stuff in New Zealand, but also the export of the technology to the globe that comes from New Zealand is the opportunity as well. But being very cautious about it. Sorry for the long answer on that.
Oh, great answer. Thanks, Gareth. Pete, I'll come back to you because what you said in your first comment, do you think the seafood aquaculture sector would even want to consider modern genetic technologies questions in terms of where do you see benefits that might come?
Yeah. So I guess the aquaculture, the farmed seafood sector, what's clear is we don't see a need for these right at the moment. But what we do see is a whole lot of challenges around changing environmental conditions associated with our farming systems, right? And we see that these type of technologies do show potential to offer solutions for in the future. And, they can basically give us options that might be used to lessen impacts on the wider environment, to make our products more resilient to disease or stresses that might arrive with climate change and some of those changed conditions, or even improve the efficiency of the production system as a whole. So though we don't see a need to step into these technologies now, we do see the landscape changing, and we certainly support the discussion around the regulatory environment in advance of when we do find that we do want to take that step or consider it.
Nice. So just staying with you, Pete, then, have we sort of fully explored the conventional breeding options, do you think?
Well, I guess in terms of the aquaculture industry, right? We're a really young industry internationally and in New Zealand, which means we haven't had the benefit of a long history of domestic traditional breeding programs. The species that we farm here in New Zealand are rather unique in a global context, so we don't take a lot of benefit from international breeding programs. So when we look at that within our sector, we see a huge amount of untapped potential just in those traditional breeding programs for our farming systems and the species. what we also see is an ability to scale benefits from those traditional breeding programs really exponentially fast, just because of the breeding method, if you like, of the aquaculture species. They're broadcast spawners. You can go from several parents to tens of thousands of offspring. So we can accelerate up the curve of a traditional breeding approach really quick. And we see that we're still really at the bottom of that curve, and we need to explore that before really getting into some of these technologies.
Interesting. I have got a couple of questions in the chat. Emily, MB is currently considering legislation around gene technologies. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, the process has started where MB is assessing how legislation could be reworked to have be more enabling of gene technologies. So this work is underway, and they are preparing advice to give to Cabinet, to make decisions on our regulatory future in this space too. So that work is being undertaken at the moment, and I know that we're connecting with a number of people in the community to understand their perspectives of what we should be considered in that reform.
Thank you. We do have another question for you, Emily. A recent paper reported using AI GPT models to design CRISPR proteins unknown in nature. What impacts do you think this could have on the regulatory framework?
Oh, here you're touching into my research area, which really looking at how we can, how we can mix and match sequences for greatest impact, readily, and using the advances in AI is going to be a huge part of guiding some experimental design. So I really feel like we're in a space with a lot of science and in terms of a lot of AI, actually, in terms of overlap of techniques. So I think it's really important that we don't see these techniques in complete isolation. They do overlap, and what we learn in data management, and if you like, DNA sequences is all about data. In a way, it's code, it's data. What we can learn there in terms of machine learning models or data management is exciting the community in terms of the opportunities.
We are coming to the end, but I'm just going to come back for any who might like to sort of address this particular question, but I might start with you, Gareth. In terms of your opinion, how do we balance those possible benefits against the risks, and what factors might you consider being prioritized? And some examples are, social, cultural, economic, etc.
Yeah, I think the one of the concerns that has always cropped up is just the fear of the unknown and the lack of data that will give us confidence into the future. So if the initial examples that come through are the safest they can be in terms of, for example, only using within species material that is basically enhanced natural selection. So if you think about natural selection that occurs just through crossbreeding, and you're able to apply techniques that are genetically modern genetic techniques to do the same thing using CRISPR, that when you explain that to consumers and through the regulation framework, that's a whole lot easier to get your head around why that is okay, why that's basically natural, and why that should be deemed to be natural in the labeling, etc. And when consumers are explained it that way, they're not starting to freak out about a new protein that's just been created by a computer that's been stuck into a piece of fruit. That would freak everyone out. So I think it's a very prudent and easy first steps approach to it, and being very, very cautious about all stakeholders and engagement around that, so that it's a journey of fact-based discovery without anyone taking very fast and strong positions on it.
Great, thanks, Gareth. Pete, anything to add to that in terms of that question?
No, I guess I'm not a genetic scientist or anything like that, but in my sort of, I guess, from an aquaculture perspective, a seafood perspective, coming through this work, it's been really enlightening, the broad spectrum of techniques and technology that's come along. And I think general societal awareness as to what they are and the nuances, that's where there's a whole lot of education and understanding work to be done, similar to what Gareth was just talking about, because that's not the type of technique that people often think of when they hear the word, genetic techniques.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Look, thank you so much to all of you for giving up some of your day to come on and help us present this new report. Thank you, PwC, and obviously the team behind you. We're just going to now move to my colleague, Director of Implementation, Mark Fitzpatrick. And Mark is working on phase 2. So it's a much smaller piece of work, but it is, we do have a slight follow-up to this phase 1, and handing over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Vicky. Kia ora tātou, everyone. Yeah, so in terms of what happens next, one of the things we obviously hope happens is you'll all digest this report and consider it, but we also hope you'll be part of the ongoing conversation. So that might mean sharing the report with others who you think might be interested, but there's another specific piece of work we hope you could be involved in. So most of you won't be aware, this report is intended to be phase 1 of 2 phases of work. Phase 2 is an action pathway. So this will include a high-level overview of the other parts of the jigsaw puzzle you saw Vicky share earlier. It will help identify key steps that could be taken next in New Zealand to inform decisions and conversations about modern genetic technologies and, crucially, how to prioritise these steps. So to inform this work, we'd love your participation in the poll that Vicky mentioned earlier, which you will find in your inbox shortly after this webinar finishes. The poll is essential to the second phase of this work. We need to make sure we're hearing a wide variety of voices when we do this, and that's where you come in. So in the poll, you will see we are looking at a high-level list of elements that could be considered, including environmental and socioeconomic factors. It's a straightforward poll. You don't need any special expertise in biotechnology to complete it. We just want to hear your views. Once that's completed, we'll use the findings from the poll to inform the groups that had direct input into the report and other relevant experts. We'll capture their thoughts in workshops, and the poll is your chance to have your say on that work. So a huge thanks in advance for doing the survey for us. It's really crucial, and we appreciate it very much. Back to you, Vicky.
My apologies. That brings us to the end of the webinar. A huge thank you to Ben and Sophie and the team at PwC. We really hope that you enjoy reading that report. It does go live on our website, and you can download that from there. Thank you to the speakers, to Emily, to Gareth, to Peter for coming onto our panel. Thank you to AgMart for supporting this work. At over 140 pages, at least read the executive summary, but there is a lot of detail also for those who enjoy reading and getting into what's behind it all. Remember, it's to help inform conversation. It's about what we could do, not about what we should do. So please, in the chat now is the link to our poll. Please click on that. We will chase you and send another email as well, but hopefully you can do that for us. Thank you very much. Have a great day.